Imagine waking up on your own land, coffee still steaming, and watching the HOA president Karen smirk while the police march across your vines. What would you do if a neighbor tried to crush your family business with a rule book and a grudge? Dawn in Solstice Valley rolls in like a soft curtain, silver mist sliding low between rows of grapes. I was out there before the sun, pruning shears in one hand, mug in the other, when I heard sirens thin, far away at first, then sharp as a needle. Boots crunched over fallen leaves, radios hissed, my dogs barrel, and later, you'll meet, justice went stiff beside my boots. And there she was, Karen. Perfect hair, perfect nails, phone up like she was filming a victory parade. She actually winked. I nearly laughed into my coffee. My name's Marcus. Most folks call me Mark Rivers. A few years back, I was a corporate attorney in San Francisco, charging $400 an hour to argue about dirt I'd never touched. Then my marriage blew apart like a cheap lawn chair in a windstorm. My ex found comfort with my law partner, yeah. I know. Cliché, and the settlement scraped me clean faster than a slot machine can blink. What I had left was my grandfather's old place, a 40-acre vineyard tucked into Solstice Valley. Planted in, let me think, 1962. Back when folks waved from tractors and never said homeowners association with a straight face. I moved into the farmhouse he built with his brothers. Every board had a story. The floors creaked like tired knees. The kitchen smelled like coffee and sun-baked wood. After years of conference calls and fluorescent lights, walking the rows at first light felt like real therapy. The place needed work irrigation lines that looked older than disco. Tractors that coughed like smokers, but it was my family's dirt. You don't quit on dirt that carries your name. Then came Karen. If you've never met an HOA Karen, imagine a politician with mall cop energy and a clipboard that thinks it's a sword. That's her. Karen Hartwell ran Solstice Heights like a duchess runs a garden party, rules for everything, mercy for nothing. Her husband, Preston, is a developer whose houses all look like they were copy-pasted by a bored intern. Big beige boxes with open concept, everything, and soul nowhere. They drove matching white SUVs that had never seen mud. Not once. Trouble started with a fence. I was replacing the old cedar along the property line, standard agricultural fencing to keep deer from tasting the expensive grapes, and I hear the slam of a door like a judge dropped a gavel. Karen struts up in heels that were not designed for soil. Clipboard under her arm. Sunglasses big as hubcaps. "Sir," she says, "that fencing violates our aesthetic guidelines." "Ma'am," I said, leaning on my post-hole digger, "this farm has been here since before the interstate. Your development has been here. What? 3 years, maybe 4? Neighborhood standards," she says, every syllable polished. "This is a residential community now." Residential. The way she said it. You'd think grapes were contagious. She clicked away. And 2 days later, a certified letter arrived, thick enough to bruise shins. Cease and desist. Unauthorized agricultural structures. Threats of $500 a day in fines. Copies to the county. To my bank. To the local paper. This wasn't a neighborly complaint. This was a press release with teeth. Most people forget, I used to live in litigation. I did real estate law for a decade and a half, and I still remember where the sharp edges are. Agricultural property in this valley isn't just dirt zoned for corn. There are heritage protections, use rights, deed restrictions that outlive boards and plans, and power suits. My grandfather, God rest him, kept a file labeled in pencil, "Important, keep forever." Inside were copies of the original deed and a stack of papers that smelled like attics and old ink. The words that mattered were simple, perpetual farming rights. I sent a letter of my own, polite, typed, with copies of the deed, the exemptions, the statutes. I CC'd the same crowd she did, plus a couple more, and asked the county for confirmation, on the record, that my agricultural use was lawful. I did not mention coffee spitting out my nose when I saw her aesthetic guidelines. 2 days later, the county inspector shows Rodriguez. Good guy. He looked over the barn from 1965. The equipment shed from 1998. The old root cellar my granddad dug by hand. He checked everything, like a man who has seen both honest mistakes and angry neighbors with time to burn. "Mr. Rivers," he said, signing his forms, "you're solid. Whoever filed that complaint doesn't understand rural zoning." I smiled so big my face hurt. A week later, I got notice of an emergency HOA board meeting. Agenda: community beautification. Agricultural eyesores. Property values. Subtle as a sledgehammer. I showed up anyway. The community room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and fear. Maybe 3 dozen homeowners sat in folding chairs, all looking like they'd rather be getting a root canal. Karen ran the show from a long table up front. She had a slide deck, of course she did, about neighborhood character. She said investment like it was a prayer. Then she unveiled a petition signatures from concerned neighbors about the commercial operation threatening our lifestyle. The way she said commercial operation, you'd think I was running a bootleg fireworks factory. Before I could stand, Mrs. Patterson, retired teacher, spine of steel, beat me to it. Marcus's family was here when this was 2 lanes and a prayer. She said, those grapes fed this valley before your stucco castles showed up. For the first time that night, Karen's smile cracked. Not much. Just enough to show the teeth. She tabled the discussion for legal review, which is HOA, for we're not done. A few days later, the social war began. Concerned neighbors of Solstice Valley appeared on Facebook like mold in a damp basement. Karen posted glamorous close-ups of my tractor, angled and filtered to look like a rust monster. She asked if anyone else had noticed delivery trucks, speeding, or flies from agricultural activities. People who'd waved at me for years started seeing something else when they looked at my hat, my boots, my hands. You know how fear works. Give it a costume and it walks around like it belongs there. The bank got jumpy. The loan officer, Janet, who used to ask about my dogs, wanted additional documentation for routine equipment financing. I caught the look she gave her screen. Someone had been whispering. I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon and spent the night reading public records. Preston had been buying land like a kid grabs candy, piecing together parcels around the valley. Agricultural dirt sells for peanuts compared to residential gold. Do the math, I mean the arithmetic, and a 40-acre farm turns into a multi-million-dollar payday if you can shove it into a subdivision. That was the play, and I was the piece that wouldn't slide. I called my law school buddy, Jake Morrison, environmental attorney now. He laughed, then got very quiet. Mark, This is a land grab script. They're counting on you not knowing your rights. I hired a surveyor. Best decision I made that month. He found something so beautiful, I nearly danced in my boots. My property line ran 50 feet farther east than any of the glossy maps, set right through the back sides of 3 Solstice Heights yards. Granddad had granted construction easements back in the day, but never gave up the ground. Old farmer wisdom, never sell the dirt. Only the rights. Meanwhile, Karen kept staging theatrics, community safety meeting, property value forum. I sat in the back and listened to her paint grapes as a public menace. Her petitions had signatures that looked like they all went to the same middle school penmanship class. My dogs have better handwriting. Vandalism followed. One morning, I found irrigation lines sliced clean, like someone used bolt cutters after watching a tutorial. A few wedding clients got anonymous calls warning about chemical contamination. Reviews popped up online saying my wine tasted like vinegar, and my events ended with lawsuits and tears. Creative fiction. Weaponized to bleed my bookings. Jake moved for an injunction. The judge granted one 18 pages that boiled down to stop harassing this farm. Dr. Sarah Bennett, a soil scientist with a laugh like wind chimes, walked my fields with me and wrote a report that read like a crime lab of dirt. Improper grading in the subdivisions, septic systems punching holes in the water table, wildlife corridors sliced with no mitigation. This isn't just sloppy, she said, tapping a map. It's vandalism dressed up as development. Then the dam really groaned. 3 HOA board members resigned in a week. Ethical concerns, they wrote, which is polite for, we don't want handcuffs. My surveyor's map started moving chess pieces in my head. Easements, historic rights, pathways that run under streets, across medians, through the neat little rows of mailboxes. And then, late one night, in the courthouse basement, because our county's filing system apparently retired sometime after the Carter years, I found the fuse. Ethel, the clerk who has guarded those drawers since the Nixon era, watched me flip papers under a buzzing fluorescent bulb. Honey, she said, what exactly are you hunting? Heritage designations, I said. And, I held my breath like I was fishing. She disappeared. Returned with a folder that had been sleeping in the wrong drawer since 1987. The Valley's Historic Agricultural District designation. Not a pretty plaque. Law with teeth. Any development within 2 miles of heritage vineyards, mine among them, needed state environmental impact studies before so much as a survey stake touched soil. Preston never filed those studies. Not once. He built first, asked forgiveness later, and sold houses on permits that should have been stamped, nope, in red. Wire fraud, mail fraud, environmental violations. RICO if you squinted. I called Jake, buddy. He said, you just pulled the sword from the stone. From there it moved fast and mean. Anonymous complaints tried to bury me in inspections, health, fire, tax. Every visit became evidence, documented by cameras I'd mounted on every corner. Father Miguel, who runs a church on the east side and organizes farm workers with a grip like rope, started connecting dots across the valley. Other families had been pushed, prodded, swed, shamed, or quietly bought out under pressure. A pattern emerged, like tire tracks in wet clay. Preston showed up one foggy morning with a briefcase and a smile that didn't touch his eyes. A generous settlement. He said $4 million if I closed within 48 hours. It's best for everyone, he added. Which is developer for I'm drowning. Preston, I said. I wouldn't sell you a fence post. His face melted. You don't understand our resources. Funny thing, by then, I was wearing a wire at the suggestion of Agent Rodriguez. Same Rodriguez. Yes. But different badge. Turns out the county inspection had introduced him to my rose. The bureau introduced him to my pain. Every threat. Every half admission. Every oh-so-generous bribe lived on tape now. Karen's socials went nuclear. She posted 20 times a day rumors about my taxes, my divorce, my wine, my dog, for all I know. People started backing away from her like a fire alarm just went off. Meanwhile, state investigators began circling slow, quiet, relentless. The Attorney General's office sent polite emails with impolite attachments. Local news sniffed a story that could win awards. Jake called a mediation. Dr. Bennett prepped slides that would make a jury gasp. Father Miguel rallied families who'd been bulldozed by paperwork. Ethel ironed her blouse and packed a tote bag of files like a grandma going to war. We set the stage in the town hall, where the carpet smells like coffee and old promises. When the night came, Solstice Valley filled the room. Cameras in the back, council members at the sides, HOA folks up front, with crossed arms and pursed lips. Karen spoke first. Voice like a bell. Words like a hammer. Neighborhood integrity. Community standards. One selfish vineyard. She lifted a petition like a trophy. Preston followed with his best reasonable businessman tone. Fair market value, he said. Compromise, he said. I could practically hear his lenders tapping their watches. I stood, took my time, thanked everyone for showing up, smiled at Mrs. Patterson in the third row. Then I opened my folder and laid out a story that did not blink. Perpetual farming rights from the old deed. The heritage designation from 1987. Easements beneath their backyard lawns. Environmental violations mapped in color. Mortgage documents that looked like a card tower in a wind. Copies of permits without the study that law demanded. And this part tasted like ripe grapes. The letters from the Attorney General's office. Ongoing investigation, they said. But the eyes in that room could read between lines. And, one more thing, I said, glancing to the doors. Agent Rodriguez stepped in with two marshals. Badges out. The room went soft around the edges. Like heat rising from asphalt. Karen started shouting about conspiracies. Preston went white as winter. You have never heard a room so quiet as the moment handcuffs click. 6 months is both forever and the blink of an eye when justice finally stretches its legs. Preston pled in federal court after his lawyers read the discovery and decided oxygen was precious. The judge, a woman who could freeze water with a look, called his scheme a systematic exploitation of agricultural families that represents the laziest kind of greed. Karen did the perp walk in heels, then traded them for state-issue slippers and 6 months of thinking time. When she came home 3 counties away, she didn't bring the white SUV. Solstice Heights learned a hard truth when the paper under your house is crooked. The paint on your shutters can't save you. The state condemned the phases that never should have been built. Demolition crews ate beige palaces bite by bite until the hillside breathes again. What rose in their place wasn't more boxes. It was a ribbon of preserved land that let foxes run and creeks remember where to go. Back at the farm, we built something better than a victory lap. We started the Solstice Heritage Foundation with settlement funds and donations that showed up in envelopes with no return address, some from old-timers, some from young families who said, "We didn't know. We're sorry." Scholarships for ag students. Saturday workshops for kids so they can put their hands in real soil and know where food actually begins. Guided walks where Dr. Bennett points to cover crops and talks about microbes like they're magic because, let's be honest, they kinda are. Business boomed in ways that felt weird at first, then wonderful. Reporters Love a Farmer fights the HOA headline. And our little label Justice Valley started outselling our production. The phone rang with brides and grooms booking dates out past next harvest. And touring buses pulled up with folks who wanted to stand between rows and taste sunlight with their eyes closed. I learned to say no without guilt so we wouldn't grow beyond the land's good mood. My favorite night each week is the Farmers Alliance meeting in the barn. We push tables together under the old rafters and pour coffee strong enough to fix tractors. People show up with stories, receipts, questions, and the kind of hugs that last a beat too long because the fight isn't over in other valleys. Father Miguel moderates like a coach. No one grandstands. Everyone gets heard. We map out county hearings, share attorney numbers, and teach folks the sentence, "I wish someone had handed me years ago. Show me the statute." Ethel became a folk hero. She wrote a little book, hand-stapled at first, called Filing Cabinets and Felons. And, I'm not kidding. People line up after church to get it signed. She reads permits like some folks read palms and finds the same truth either way. The story's in the lines if you look long enough. As for me, something I closed like a door swung open again. That heavy, grown man kind of sadness that moves in after a marriage dies well. It started packing boxes once the fog lifted. Sarah and I took to walking the rows at sunset, trading science and sarcasm. My dogs, Barrel and Justice, learned her footsteps and started waiting by the porch before she even turned into the lane. One evening she said, "You ever think about rebuilding the root cellar?" And I heard what she meant and said, "Yeah." We found out later that Preston wasn't a lone wolf. He was part of a pack that liked their steaks undercooked and their permits invisible. The Bureau kept asking questions and, this time, I got to help with a smile. Patterns repeat across counties like bad wallpaper, but once a community sees the seam, it starts peeling. If you're listening and thinking, okay, but what do I do if my HOA grows fangs? Here's what I tell neighbors in plain talk. First, read your deed. Then read your granddad's deed if you've got one. Rights hide in plain sight. And old paper outlives new power. Second, document everything. Phone calls, letters, drive-bys, photos of anonymous vandalism. Keep a notebook by the coffee pot and write each thing down. Date and time. Because your memory will smooth edges, you need sharp. Third, talk to others like, humbly. You'll be shocked how many folks have their own bruises and their own receipts. And finally, find a professional who knows the field you stand in. Lawyers, sure, but also the soil nerds, the water folks, the surveyors. They'll see what you can't. And sorry. One more. Say no when no is the truth. It's a complete sentence and a strong fence. We did one more thing that mattered to my bones. We held a harvest festival and invited everybody, the brave, the doubtful, the ones who signed petitions against me, and the ones who brought casseroles when the nights got long. We put grills beside grape bins, let the kids dig potatoes with their hands, and had a bluegrass band under lights strung from pole to pole. People cried in the awkward, a good way when you realize you believed something that wasn't true and you're still welcome at the table. I keep the first cease and desist in a frame by my desk, not as a trophy, but as a compass. It points to where stubbornness becomes stewardship. On mornings when fog rests low and the dogs track fox scent along the fence, I pour coffee and step out onto the porch and listen. The land answers slow, but it always answers. Imagine paying thousands in HOA fees just to be told you can't park in your own driveway. Folks joke about that online, 'cause it's outrageous and true in too many zip codes. But what nearly wrecked us wasn't a parking ticket. It was a script pressure. Paperwork. Panic, designed to turn heritage into inventory. That script only works when we read it the way they want. Change the ending, and the whole play falls apart. So, yeah, Karen thought she could film my defeat at sunrise. Instead, she filmed the opening scene of her own closing credits. And me, I learned the best revenge isn't a viral clip. It's a valley where foxes run. Water runs clear. Kids learn to plant beans. And an old farmhouse fills with new laughter. What would you do here? Anyone else had a HOA pull this kind of nonsense on you? Drop your story below, 'cause, you know, your words might be the sign someone else needs to stop a bulldozer with a piece of paper and a backbone. The phone started ringing from farther away. Oregon, Vermont, Texas. Voices cracked in the same places mine had. They told us our tractors violate sightline harmony. They said the harvest lights are nuisance illumination. They fined us for a rooster my dad raised, before their bylaws were even typed. We built a little team, Jake on the law, Sarah on the science, Father Miguel on community, and started sharing templates, a letter here, a public records request there. The right way to ask a clerk for the file that someone accidentally slipped into the wrong drawer 3 decades ago. And, we made a pact, no monsters. Even the villains in our story are people who once held babies and danced at a wedding. We leave room for them to change. Not so they can hurt us again, but so we don't harden into statues. Statues crack. People bend and keep walking. Was everything neat after the headlines? No. A few ex-neighbors still cross the street when they see my truck. Zoning meetings still stretch too long. There are days, the math that is. The budget frowns at me, and I frown back. That's the thing about living. Where you work, you can always see what needs mending. Fences, pumps, hearts. It's all maintenance. But there's a different sound in the valley now. You hear it in the way folks clap at Little League when a kid from a farm and a kid from a cul-de-sac share high fives. You hear it when the mayor, who once said the word residential like it was sacred, says stewardship on purpose. You hear it when someone at the grocery store asks, "What kind of cover crop should I plant in my raised bed?" and doesn't blink when I answer, "Crimson clover." If you like spring looking like a postcard. Sometimes I stand by the rebuilt root cellar and run my hand along the stones we set back in place. And I think about my grandfather, writing "Keep Forever" on a folder. He wasn't a lawyer. He didn't say perpetual rights out loud. But he knew what he was doing. He was saving a seat for me at a table I hadn't even found yet. Karen's name rarely comes up anymore. When it does, it's softer, not to excuse, to acknowledge. A few folks say she sends checks to the foundation once in a while. Small envelopes. No note. Maybe it's rumor. Maybe it's grace. Either way, I don't plan my life around it. The vines need pruning, whether anyone apologizes or not. We put up a bulletin board in the barn that says, wins. And we tack things to it that wouldn't make the news, but matter just as much. County clerk moved legacy maps to digital archive. HOA adopted a right to farm acknowledgement. First grade class planted beans. Mrs. Patterson taught 2 teenagers to drive stick in the hayfield, and nobody stalled out. Okay. 1 stall. But it was a noble stall. If you're still listening because the fight's knocking on your door, here's a simple script that fits in a pocket. Respectfully, show me the bylaw that applies to agricultural land with perpetual use rights. Kindly provide copies of all studies required under state environmental law for developments within 2 miles of heritage cultivation. For the record, please confirm receipt of this letter and the statutory basis for your demand. It's not poetry. It doesn't need to be. It's a flashlight under the table where monsters hide. They shrivel under light. Harvest came in sweet and a little stubborn the next fall. Weather's always a character in a farm story, moody, generous, fussy, and we played our parts. Hustling bins before heat. Nursing the press when a belt squealed. Friends showed up with sleeves rolled and playlists ready. Barrel and Justice slept so hard they dreamed with their paws, running in place on the rug. That Sunday, Father Miguel stood up and said, "There are false prophets who build on sand, and there are faithful people who build on stone. It wasn't about us, and it was completely about us." After service, a kid with skinned knees asked if grapes get sad when you pick them. They get purposeful, I said. His mom laughed and wrote it down on her phone. Jake got invited to speak at a law school. He hates podiums, but loves telling young lawyers the truth. You can make a living and keep your soul. The trick is picking a river to stand in, then refusing to move when the water rises. He told them about Ethel and the wrong drawer. About the right questions. About how justice is slow, not because it's lazy, but because it's careful. He told them, "Don't confuse speed with courage." Sarah started a community soil lab in the back room off our packing shed. People bring jars of earth like they're carrying cake to a potluck. She labels, tests, teaches. We hung a chalkboard that says, "What did the ground teach you this week?" I wrote. "That humility tastes like dust and water." And she wrote, "That compost is resurrection you can hold." We still have hard days. A pump fails on a Saturday night. A permit gets misread by someone new in an office who didn't live the story with us. Karen's old posts flare back to life when a board account dredges them up. And strangers fling words from far away like rocks from passing cars. On those nights, I sit on the porch and listen to the irrigation tick and the coyotes argue on the ridge. And I remember the quiet in the town hall when the cuffs closed. Not because that's the best sound, because it marked the moment fear stopped calling the tune. So, here's my hook again. Because stories circle back where they started. What would you do if your HOA dialed 911 on your sunrise? If you're in that moment now, if there's a Karen with a clipboard at the end of your driveway, breathe. Drink your coffee hot. Pet your dog. Then take out a pen and write 3 lines who you are. What your deed says. And what the law says belongs to you. You don't need to roar. A steady voice shakes rooms. Share this with someone who still thinks aesthetic guidelines outrank heritage and honest work. Tell me where you're watching from. Drop your HOA horror story below, names changed if you need to, and tell us what you learned and what you wish you'd known sooner. Anyone else had a HOA do this to you? 'Cause here's the part they don't put in brochures when neighbors stand up together with facts. With patience. With a little righteous. Stubborn, the bully's rulebook turns to mulch. And mulch, friend, makes the best soil for new things to grow.